everyone, in this video we are going to discuss what we can do to reduce the number of greenhouse gas emissions. But in order to understand this or understand our part in this story, we need to look at a graph of our top 10 emitters. And so what I see right away is something that's really, really sad. And that is the fact that the United States is actually ranked number 2 in this. And this is a competition we do not want to win. In fact, if you see our other North American buddies, they are way down here. So I wish we were down there. And so what we want to do in this video is try to figure out what we as American citizens could actually do to encourage our government to decrease the amount of greenhouse gas emissions we have, or what we could do personally on our own scale. And so essentially what we can do is look at it from either a consumer standpoint or a producer. And so what's the really sad part is when a consumer tries to reduce their number of emissions, essentially it is 3 to 5 times more expensive than when a producer does that. And it simply has to do with the fact that it is not cheap to put solar panels on your house, or unless you live by a very powerful river, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to use hydroelectric power. And so it essentially comes down to the role of the producer. But unfortunately, these producers are not really interested in reducing their number of emissions. Their goal is to actually figure out a way to produce new sources of energy, which is great, but that's going to take a long, long time. So in the meantime, what the producers are doing right now is they are working on something called carbon capture and storage. So it's kind of a, I don't want to say a loophole, but it's somewhere in the middle. So they're not decreasing their emissions really. They're not finding new energy sources, but they're somewhere in between. So essentially what we need to understand is a lot of these power plants are going to take a source of fuel or a fossil fuel, and they're going to treat it with oxygen and do a combustion reaction in which they create carbon dioxide and water. So essentially what they do then is they snatch that carbon dioxide out of the air immediately, and they use a number of different pipelines or pipes to get that carbon dioxide into the ground into a number of different sections. And so we're just going to look at 4 of the different common ones. So one of the first things they do is they try to dump the carbon dioxide into ponds, and they encourage the bacteria to interact with the carbon dioxide so we can decrease the concentration of carbon dioxide. Another one that they do is they put it into old oil and coal reservoirs. I always spell this word wrong. There we go. They put it into oil and coal reservoirs that have been depleted, so there's a bunch of holes underground just sitting there, and they just pump that CO2 in there to try to kind of fill the space. Another one they look at is they put them into coal beds. And so essentially what this does is it takes carbon dioxide and converts it into methane, which is great for our CO2 concentration, but we now know that methane actually has a higher global warming potential than carbon dioxide. So is that better? Kind of, I don't know. And then the last thing they can do is they can dump it into a bunch of geological formations. So any holes that are just naturally existing there, or they can try to encourage it to interact and create this carbonate, and so we can create calcium carbonate and so on and so forth. Essentially, they can help create limestone. So this is one way to do it, but unfortunately, it is very, very, very expensive. And so not that many plants are currently using this method. So it's great for the ones that are, but the ones that aren't are not really too keen on starting this method. And unfortunately, it is simply not an answer. There's just too much carbon dioxide out in our atmosphere that this method alone is not going to reduce our emissions. So it's one way, but not a great way. So what is something you could do more as a consumer? Well, there's something called the Billion Trees Project, which I really, really like. And so the Billion Trees Project was essentially just a group, a nonprofit group that tried to get humans, no matter where you're from, to pledge to plant a tree or to even just donate some money so someone else will plant a tree. And their goal was to simply just plant 1 billion trees. And then it grew to what they wanted to plant 1 billion trees in every single country. And so right now, as of July of 2015, they have planted 12.6 billion trees, and they have over 13.8 billion trees that are pledged. So that's kind of cool. So their goal was 1 billion, and they're now at around 13 billion. So I'm going to ask you to do your part. Here's my question. Will you consider pledging to plant 1 tree this semester? I'm just asking if you will consider it. Please? right, did you get an answer? Hopefully you did. Although there's not a right or wrong answer, I hope your answer was yes. And so let me give you a couple of ideas of how you could do this. First of all, get your mom something like a tree for Mother's Day. That's easy. Your mom wins. I'm happy. It's a win-win situation. You could get your girlfriend a random rose bush or something like that. They normally really like that. You can go online and just donate $10 and they'll plant 10 trees for you. So get 9 buddies together, all of you put in $1 and we can plant 10 trees. So that's a perfect win-win situation, okay? So think about it, consider it, and please, please, please do it just for me. Okay, now moving on. The last thing we can do as a consumer is we can put pressure on our U.S. government to consider the Kyoto Protocol. So this was a protocol that was established, in 1997. And so essentially there are a couple main points to this. The main thing is the point of the protocol was to reduce emissions. And there were very specific gases. There are 6 of them, okay? So of carbon dioxide, we've talked a lot about that. Methane, we've talked a lot about that one. We've also discussed some for our nitrous oxide. So these are the 3 we've discussed in this course. There are also 3 other ones that they want you to reduce as well, which would be HFCs, PFCs, so hydrofluorocarbons, perfluorocarbons, and then also SF6. So it is important to understand that all 6 of these are trying to be reduced, but we only had time to focus on these 3 in our course. So the first thing that protocol tried to do was to get everyone to sign and to agree to reduce these emissions of these 6 gases. Unfortunately, the U.S. did not sign this. Okay, so this is when Bush was president, and he was not interested in it, and with good reason. The first thing he said is that this would cripple our U.S. economy, and that we just could not physically do this without just destroying all of our power plants and destroying a lot of our governments and large corporations, which he was absolutely correct. Like, that would not have worked. But we could still kind of work toward it, even though we're not perfectly agreeing to this protocol. But the second thing, and this was something that he had a good point, in my opinion, is that what they had very, very low regulations for developing countries. So there were different rules based on what your economic status was. And so countries like China and India could be producing as many as 1 coal plant a day, whereas we were not allowed to do that at all, and we had to completely, drastically begin to reduce our emissions. And so it was basically a double standard, and Bush was like, hey, I'm not into that. Like, that's not fair. It's going to destroy our economy and rarely even touch these other countries. And so there's a little bit of a give and take. And so what we want to do in the next section is discuss what we can do in our local cities or even statewide to try to kind of get toward this protocol without actually signing it and agreeing to it in a way that would cripple our economy. Good luck. Take care of yourselves. Drink water.